It's your favorite black guy from Nebraska. Yes, it's black people in Nebraska. I know it's been a while since I talked to you guys, since I dropped some content, but I'm extremely busy and working every day, and I'm still trying to get this CDL license. I'm still at it. So it takes a lot of studying, a lot of my time, and plus I'm a father, husband, homeowner, all that good stuff. So, this stuff takes the majority of my time. Okay. So, but I'm back. I'm going to give you guys some chapter 7. It's very, very interesting. It's more information to compound on top of the things that we already know. It's very informative. You know what I mean? So those who are interested, please continue to enjoy the content. Those who are not, please, well, you know what? You want to hate watch, you can hate watch. I ain't tripping. But please do not go in the comment section being ignorant. I know some of you guys can't help it, but please try to control yourself on this one. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the beginning of chapter 7, and it is from Sachems and Sagamores to Sermons and Pastors, John Wesley and Charles Wesley, and the creation of the Black Baptists. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. As mentioned, many of the passages were changed in ways to justify the mass enslavement, murders, lynchings, kidnappings, the rape of thousands upon thousands of black indigenous women and children, the castration of many black boys who have been reduced to a word, Negro, which to Europeans justify all the terrors and tortures done unto them. For example, George Washington Carver, who was also an American slave-born child in 1865, the devil by the name of Moses Carver was his owner, who American history tells was opposed to slavery. But this man had slaves as well. He was worried Mr. Washington would try to have sexual relations with his daughter when he came of age. So he had him castrated as a young boy. There was a mass attempt to wash black American history and even changing George Washington Carver's story, claiming he had diphtheria, is the reason for the castration. But late 1700s into the 1800s, there are hundreds of cases of castrations of young boys deemed Negro, who were either born or kidnapped from their family in the Americas and sold into slavery. If you look this subject up, American historians tried to word it as if it was a form of punishment for fugitive slaves, as if slavery wasn't punishment enough. When you think of the awful things Hitler did to the German Jewish descent, which was happening in the 5 Points or New York and South alone, to everyone deemed Negro in the Americas, was Hitler on steroids. You can find thousands of photos of these horrors we showed earlier being done to anyone of dark hue, at times simply for entertainment of whites, which lasted well through the 1800s into the 1900s of pure violence, starting with the Spaniard Catholics, ending with the English Christians, both using religion to justify all of their devilish deeds. Let's get back to the AMEC. These churches were first commissioned in New York, which grew out of the Free African Society, founded in 1787, was an organization that held religious services and provided mutual aid for people deemed free Negroes and people of color, quote unquote, and their descendants in Philadelphia. The society was founded by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. FAS was the first black religious institution in the city and led to the establishment of the first independent black churches in the United States. It was predominantly ran by Prince Hall Freemasons, there you go, who became ordained into priesthood, who also had to follow strict Anglo standards of practice when chartering fraternal lodges and Christian denominations in what was deemed black communities. As long as they followed these standards as set in place, they could get government funding and continue operating for many years to come. There is a huge chance that if you consider yourself a religious black Christian today who goes to church weekly, odds are you're a member of one of these AME offshoots churches, or they're in one of your communities. These churches would later become the sole mouthpieces for black communities for men known today as black Christian leaders, which the majority of them having sometimes to an AMEC or Masonic lodges. For example, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the location of Martin Luther King Jr. preached at, is also an offshoot of AME Church and spoke at many AME churches across the United States. Most Christian civil rights activities came out of an AME church. Freemasonry attracted countless prominent black Christian pastors and evangelists into Freemasonry, from the beginning, and many Prince Hall Freemasons became Christian pastors and evangelists. One being Bishop Richard Allen, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, and first Grand Treasurer of the African Lodge of Pennsylvania. Notice that A word, African, as if all black people come from Africa. There was Reverend John Morant, one of the first black preachers and missionaries in North America. There was also Reverend Thomas W. Stringer, ordained in Richard Allen AME's church. Stringer was one of the most accomplished churchmen, politicians, and Freemasons of his day. A deputy grand master in 2 Grand Lodges, and a state senator from Mississippi, Stringer spent his life working up and down from Canada to Mississippi, organizing AME churches, schools, and Masonic lodges. When we were searching for copies of Maricha's memoirs, which are part of the Harry Albo Williamson papers, 1831 to 1965, come to find out he was also a Prince Hall Freemason, which is deeply intertwined in her family. Frederick Douglass, in 1839, when he was 22 years old, became licensed to preach at the quarterly conference of the AMEZ and preached at many more AME churches. Today's history will say he became a member because he faced discrimination in white churches, but this again is false. Segregation was enforced, and no so-called blacks were going to white churches simply in fear and being killed, jailed, or even kidnapped and forced into slavery. Black Americans had their own communities, towns. There was no need to travel to white churches. This didn't happen until we went into the mid-90s after desegregation. On the next page, we'll show you a graph on how these churches spread from New York into other communities, deemed Negro communities, throughout the entire United States, later expanding into Africa to repeat the same process they did in the Americas. All right. Below, which is in front of you, right in front of you, is a graph showing all the locations of AME churches reside. Number one being the New York area, which is where the first AME churches ever started in the 1800s. These churches purposefully targeted predominantly black communities or congregations, later expanding into Africa to continue the same process of religious indoctrination. When you slowly break down each story bit by bit, you can get a better picture of how the Christian religion was used as a weapon against the indigenous population of America, as a form of ethnocide, which deprives the people of their ethnic makeup. Though through various means in America, many would later be reclassified as Negroes, colors, blacks, freedmen, mulattoes, Creoles, African American, African Canadians, Afro-Caribbean, Maroons, and the list goes on, with the majority of the new nations proudly identifying with the religion that was adopted by their ancestors out of fear from being persecuted under the many racial and religious laws at the time. Being a devoted Christian, peaceful, obedient Negro was the only way to be lynched, not to be lynched, which happened just by looking or speaking to a white European immigrant the wrong way. When you see something saying founded by, they are only talking about the congregation, which are majority black, and the property owners, and the Christian authority that dictates what can be preached were always white religious branches, which gives them the authority to operate under the Christian religion. The AME churches were usually always black, but their teachings derive from the Wesleyan Arminian, which is a theological tradition in Protestant Christianity based on the ministry of 18th century evangelical reformer brothers John Wesley and Charles Wesley, to which it was named after. So it was called Wesleyan Arminianism. That's what it's called. All Baptist churches follow much of the same theology, but using their own preaching style, and all Baptists would qualify as Protestants. But not all Protestants would necessarily be Baptists, if you can catch that. Many black Americans don't know that the two largest Pentecostal denominations in the world are the Assemblies of God and Pentecostal Church of God denominations, hold officially to Arminian tradition and views. That's a lot of reason why the truth can't be told in most churches. Most black Americans identify as Protestant. Unlike black Americans in other faith traditions, the majority of black Protestant churchgoers attend religious services at a house of worship where both the leadership and most other congregations are black. Black Protestant churches are distinctive from other types of congregations such as Protestant churches where the leadership and membership are mostly or exclusively white or some other race. Catholic churches and congregations and other faiths in a variety of ways beyond their racial makeup. These include their style of worship, the topics discussed by clergy, and the length of religious services. This is true for both Black Americans who attend churches associated with historically Black Protestant denominations and those who attend other predominantly Black churches. Many might think to themselves, when, where, why, and how did the majority of Black Americans and Canadians who descend from USA become majority Baptist Christians? When? 1787, Free American Society. Where? New York. Why? To simply commit ethnocide among their nations, replacing their ethnic makeup and cultural beliefs with Christianity and a whitewashed version of their gods. How? Through various means of brutality, fear tactics, and force. One of the main tools used were guns. During these years, Black congregations in the South were also forbidden by most Blacks on the plantation, rural areas, and white towns. Many weren't allowed to read, write due to many slave laws forbidding them in the southern states. A Black pastor was usually one slave who was taught to memorize the slave Bible we mentioned earlier, and they became the pastors in the plantations they were enslaved on. They weren't allowed to have their own churches and usually had a white observer making sure they weren't teaching anything they weren't supposed to, as you see in the picture in front of you. Go down. Okay. Let's go ahead and read the illustration. The Illustrated London News, December 5th, 1863. The title, Church Service at Plantation, South Carolina. So the indoctrination begins using the Holy Bible. Frederick Douglass never preached once in the South at any time of his career because he was terrified of being killed by white extremists who didn't agree with their messages, but always praised the Southern abolitionists. Douglass always criticized Christianity of the South by demonstrating the hypocrisy of slaveholders who claim to be religious yet treat their slaves with cruelty. Let's forget that the main goal from the very beginning was converting the Indians. But you must understand that the Indians didn't know God, which was successfully completed by the end of the 1800s, well into the 1900s. Today, 80% of the population reclassified as Negroes, Blacks, colors, mulattoes, have officially been converted, happily identified with some form of Christian religion forced upon their ancestors by the European whites. And I'm going to add my little information towards the end because, as you know, I don't agree with everything I read, but there's a lot of truth that is inside of this information. At the same time these AME churches were being established throughout the North, the Ku Klux Klan was being formed in the South in 1865, year slavery was supposedly abolished, quote unquote, an attempt to scare the so-called Negro, referenced in the South as Niggers, from listening to or following the so-called Black Christian leaders in the North. Much of the Black Americans in the South had no clue what was going on in the North. Only that majority of the Negroes were free. Negroes deemed slaves in the South were the children of the prisoners from all the wars fought prior to the formation of the United States from Upper and Lower Canada, Eastern USA coast and interior, West Indies, Central and South Americas, who knew nothing else but slavery and were taught it had always been this way since the beginning. Many of these children would become slaves for their entire life, living up to 100 plus years of age, teaching the next generation what they were forced to learn by the white men masters and women mistresses who kept them in slavery almost 3 full generations. Now, the next piece of information I'm going to bring you the next chapter. Well, the next portion of this chapter is going to be called Christian Clowns in Pointy Hats, aka the Ku Klux Klan. So that information was extremely vital. There was a lot of truth in that information. But what I will say is that I myself am a believer. Okay, I have a relationship with God, which I know is true. The Holy Bible, which I know is true. I'm not here to divert you away from having a relationship with God or being a believer. I feel as though there was a organized religion that was forced on these Black people, that was headed by people who were hateful, right? I feel like this organized religion that was created by these Europeans was detrimental to those who they brought it upon. So, to pretty much put it in layman's terms, these Indians, these indigenous Americans, these black people that were reclassified to being Negroes colored, they knew God. But here comes these foreigners coming onto their land, reclassifying them, teaching them a different God that is not the God of the Bible. That is my opinion. That's what I took from it. You may take something else from it. But I do believe that the indigenous Americans who were here, who were reclassified, already knew God. They knew Yahweh. They knew Yahshua. They knew God already because they are the Israelites. So they knew God, but the God that was brought to them through organized religion, through Christianity, was a different God that they didn't know. Because these people who were reclassifying them and doing these things to them were headed up by the God of this world, which is Satan. They were, everything they were doing was motivated by hate. So it was a whole different God. It was a whole different way of doing things. I don't want this to be a hit piece I want this to be a hit piece. This could be a hit piece on organized religion, but not on the God of the Bible, because you must be able to separate the two. There is organized religion, which man is the head of, and then there is the God of the Bible, who does not condone any of these things. He doesn't condone black people being reclassified to Negro, black people going through their own trials and tribulations, such as being their babies being fed to alligators. They're being sold on auction blocks, them being told that they're just Africans and that they have no right to the land that is rightfully theirs, where they come from. And just they're having their whole identity taken from them. He doesn't condone that, not the God of the Bible. But we must know and understand that these indigenous Americans that we were talking about are the Israelites of the Bible, and that they were going through the things they were going through because they went against God. So these are the curses that were brought upon them, but that doesn't make it right. So all I'm saying is, please don't allow this to, turn you off to the God of the Bible, but please allow it to turn it off to organized religion, which is Christianity, because it's not about religion. It's about relationship. So that's, take from that what you will. But one thing I want you to do, I hope you enjoyed the information, and I have a lot more information coming. These organized churches basically are started by Freemasons. A lot of them. A lot of these Baptist churches were started by Prince Hall Freemasons, Black Freemasons. That's why you see in a lot of these churches, there's no truth being taught. There's no understanding being taught. You can go there as a so-called black person and get no real truth on who you are. No realization on who you are. These pastors, a lot of them are Masons, and they are being paid to teach you certain things, which have nothing to do with the truth. So that's that. Man, I hope you guys enjoyed this information. It's probably going to be next week until I bring you guys the next piece, the next chapter, or the next part of this chapter, because I'm going to be extremely busy. Life happens. So hope you guys enjoyed this. It's your favorite black guy from Nebraska. Yes, there's black people in Nebraska. I'm out. Peace.